What's up, guys? Last night the Twab came out with a lot of weapon sandbox changes and also perk changes, and if you read it right when it came out, there were a lot of buffs to different guns in the game, pretty much every type of gun in the game, to be honest, and it was all like between 18 to 36, maybe 40% increase to their damage, and also it varied between minor and majors. It wasn't just a universal buff to all these weapons. You can go read it, I will link it down in the description. And when I was first reading it, I was like, okay, some of these weapons do need buffs, like scout rifles, sidearms, things like that, but some of these things on the list are also getting buffed by nearly the same amount that are already pretty good, such as hand cannons and some machine guns, and I was like, well, if everything's getting buffed by the same percent, it won't really change much. But then they forgot to add this, and they tweeted like 2 hours later stating they forgot to add this into the Twab and then put it in as an edit. It says minor enemies no longer take more precision damage than other enemies. These enemies previously took twice as much damage to the precision hit locations than enemies of higher ranks. You will still deal precision damage, but this is now entirely dependent on the weapon as it is for higher ranked enemies. And what this means is for the first 2 years of Destiny 2, minor enemies took twice the precision damage of majors. And as you'll see on this ogre, which is a major, I hit 658. Then on the minor enemies in the same loss sector at the exact same light level, I hit 1316, which is exactly double that of the major. And it has always been this way in Destiny 2, and that will be changing in Shadowkeep. So if you return to this loss sector in Shadowkeep and did the same test, you'd hit 658 on both the minors and the ogre. So it'd be universal, the same damage to every enemy in the game. Does not matter if it's a minor or major, the gun will do the same damage no matter what. So now these buffs kind of make sense / still kind of confuse me. So what they're pretty much doing is nerfing every weapon in the game by 50% versus minor enemies. So to understand what's actually going on here, I'm going to explain some math very quickly that a lot of people get confused about. If you nerf something by 50%, then rebuff it by 50%, it is not back to net even. For example, let's say someone does 100 damage, and you nerf it by 50%, which means cut it in half. So if you take half of 100, you now have 50 damage, right? Now if you take that 50 damage and buff it by 50%, 50% of 50 is 25, add that back to 50, and now you have 75. So that's a net decrease of 25%. So decreasing something by percent, then increasing it by the same percent is not the same thing. You'd have to rebuff it by 100% to get back to normal. So all these buffs in the Twab, which I'll link once again if you want to see them all, are all roughly like 20-30%. And that is on top of this already 50% decrease. So for example, let's just look at the one I am using. Hand cannons are getting an increase of 30% versus minor enemies in PvE. So for example, in this lost sector right now, we're hitting 1316 in this lost sector with my spare rations, right? First, it's going to get that precision decrease by 50%, which will make it hit 658. But then on top of that, it's going to get that 30% increase to minors, which will mean it'll be hitting 855 in Shadowkeep in this lost sector, which is still overall a net nerf to the weapons. So pretty much all the primaries in the game will feel weaker in Shadowkeep, and it won't affect specials and power weapons as much because you're not really using those versus minors that often, but they did increase snipers by 47% versus minors, which still won't be back to normal, but it won't feel terrible, I guess. But like I said, you're mostly using primaries on minors. So I just want to make this video to make it very clear that just because you're reading buff, all these weapons will be weaker in Shadowkeep. And whenever we get previews like this, I always have my faith in Bungie because they obviously know way more about the upcoming metas than we do. And they know and are testing this in their own private, situations. And there might be stuff that we're missing out or we just don't know yet. And I'm really hoping this is just a preview and there's a lot more to it. I'm really hoping next week's Twab is, like the second part of this, because what we have in this Twab here isn't necessarily bad. The game getting harder is overall a good change. I think they've woken up to the fact that the game became very easy and they're trying to go back to making it a little bit more grindy and a little bit harder to actually do stuff, not just be invincible gods in a well and things like that. But these changes aren't going to really shift the meta, which is where I have an issue. Some machine guns are getting buffed, it seems, and there's not really any mention Recluse at all yet. So I don't know if there's going to be another, patch note preview with nerfs coming up, because this one has nothing to do with grenade launchers or anything like that. So there's really nothing that's going to change the meta outside of just everything feeling slightly worse against minor enemies in this Twab, to be honest. Which I'm kind of disappointed about because I was kind of expecting, some new metas to rise in Shadowkeep. For example, scout rifles could be really good again like they were in Destiny 1, ARs, whatever. But if everything's kind of getting buffed by the same amount, it's not really going to change anything in the long run, Yeah, scout rifles are getting a 36% buff, but hand cannons are also getting a 30% buff, so it won't really actually change too much about the meta in my opinion. So like I said, I definitely have my faith in Bungie. They know more than we do. Maybe this is the right call. We'll just have to see in Shadowkeep. Or maybe there's a whole nother week of a Twab with, you know, nerfs and things like that that will actually shake up the meta. Or maybe this is just a very, very slim preview of what actually is the sandbox changes in Shadowkeep. So there's definitely a lot of what ifs, but if I was being honest, I would be lying if I didn't say I'm kind of disappointed in these changes so far. Anyways, let me know what you think about this, and were you under the impression that everything was getting buffed because it didn't say that one little line in the original Twab? Or did you see that, and what did you think about it? Anyways, I hope this information helps you. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.